Case 1. Zakiya Latrice Avery. In January 2014, the suburban community of Germantown, Maryland, was shaken by a horrific crime. Zakiya Latrice Avery, a 28-year-old mother, and her housemate, 21-year-old Monifa Denise Sanford, were charged with brutally stabbing Avery's two young children, ages 1 and 2, to death. The disturbing details that emerged revealed the women believed they were performing an exorcism to rid the children of evil spirits. The two surviving children, ages 5 and 8, were also attacked, but managed to survive. The investigation would soon uncover shocking truths behind this tragic act. Zakiya Avery and Monifa Sanford had met through Exousia Ministries, a church in Germantown. They formed a bond over shared religious beliefs, both convinced they were demon assassins tasked with ridding the world of evil. They believed that Avery's children were possessed and needed to be cleansed through an exorcism. Their obsession with this delusion grew stronger, leading to the deadly attack. What began as a twisted religious mission would end in a brutal and senseless tragedy. The investigation would soon uncover shocking truths behind this tragic act. Avery and Sanford were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. However, as the case progressed, questions arose about the mental state of both women. Avery's defense team argued she was not criminally responsible, claiming her actions were part of a religious mission. Sanford's defense similarly cited mental illness. Both women's psychological conditions would become crucial factors in the outcome of the trial. In 2016, the court declared Avery legally insane at the time of the killings, committing her to a psychiatric hospital. Sanford, too, was found not criminally responsible and was sent to a psychiatric facility. The case sparked debate about the intersection of mental illness, religion, and criminal responsibility. Many questioned if justice had been served, or if the system failed to fully understand the severity of their delusions, leaving a community and 2 surviving children to cope with the aftermath of a tragic, preventable loss. Case 2. Willa Glendora Blanc. Walter K. Sartori, a 73-year-old retired scientist from Hebron, Kentucky, led a secluded life. A brilliant mind in mathematics and computer science, he earned millions through algorithmic trading. Despite his wealth, Walter struggled with paranoid schizophrenia, avoiding the outside world and maintaining only online communication with a small group of friends. His cautious nature made him vulnerable, but he had no idea his life was about to be shattered by Willa Glendora Blanc, a woman who had managed to get close to him. Willa Glendora Blanc, a house cleaner from Hebron, had a reputation for persistence. After Walter declined her cleaning services, Blanc continued visiting, clearing his driveway, and even delivering his mail. Despite his reluctance, Blanc worked her way into his life, building a rapport with the elderly scientist. However, her intentions were far from innocent. Blanc saw a vulnerable man with significant wealth and began plotting to exploit him. In February 2009, Blanc found a way to gain further access to Sartori's life. She convinced him to grant her power of attorney over his financial accounts, claiming she could manage his investments. Sartori, trusting her, allowed it. Soon, Blanc had control over millions of dollars from Sartori's portfolio, transferring large sums of money into her own account. This was the beginning of her deadly plan, which would ultimately cost Sartori his life. Blanc's manipulation deepened, and she continued her deceitful actions, playing the role of a helpful assistant. After a car accident involving her husband, Blanc's criminal plan escalated. She moved forward with the next phase, kidnapping Sartori. This act would be the point of no return. Blanc was about to break Sartori's trust in the most violent way, sealing his tragic fate. Blanc abducted Sartori, taking him from his home with the help of her son, Louis Wilkinson. They transported him to a remote location and planned his murder. The motive was clear: financial gain. Blanc's greed led her to kill Sartori and dispose of his body, burning it to destroy the evidence. Sartori's life was brutally ended and his body discarded in the most horrifying way. Despite Blanc's attempts to cover her tracks, investigators found Sartori's remains at a burn site in rural Indiana, along with his glasses and personal items. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, revealing the full extent of Blanc's manipulation and brutality. The tragic end of a vulnerable man lured to his death by someone he trusted would soon lead to justice being served. Blanc and Wilkinson were arrested and charged with kidnapping, murder, abuse of a corpse, and theft. Blanc pled guilty to capital kidnapping in exchange for the murder charge being dropped, receiving a life sentence without parole. Wilkinson, admitting his role, was sentenced to 30 years for kidnapping and abuse of a corpse. While justice had been served, the tragedy of Sartori's death left a lasting impact. Case 3. Tiffany Hall. On September 21, 2006, in East St. Louis, Illinois, a chilling discovery unfolded. The body of 23-year-old Jamela Tunstall was found in an empty lot. Autopsy reports revealed she had been brutally attacked. Her abdomen was sliced open, and her unborn child had been forcibly removed. Just days earlier, Tiffany Hall had reported a stillbirth, claiming she had delivered a baby at a local park. However, her refusal to undergo a medical examination raised suspicions. Her inconsistent statements and the discovery of Tunstall's body led authorities to question Hall's involvement in the crime. On September 15, 2006, Tiffany Hall, a 26-year-old woman from East St. Louis, Illinois, brutally murdered her longtime friend, Jamela Tunstall, who was 7 months pregnant. Hall struck Tunstall multiple times with a table leg before performing a cesarean-like procedure to remove the fetus from her womb. After Tunstall bled to death, Hall disposed of her body in a vacant lot. Later that evening, Hall called emergency services, claiming she had delivered a stillborn baby at Frank Holton State Park. The following day, Hall visited the father of Tunstall's 3 children, informing him that Tunstall had asked her to pick up the children and their vehicle. This was the last time the father saw his children. Hall then drowned the 3 children, Demond, age 7, Ivan, age 2, and Janella, age 1, in the same bathtub where she had killed their mother. She concealed their bodies in the apartment's washer and dryer. Authorities were unaware of the children's deaths until Hall confessed to her boyfriend, who subsequently alerted the police. Initially, Hall's claims of a stillbirth were met with skepticism due to her refusal to undergo a medical examination. Her behavior during the funeral service, including arriving late and requesting a delay, raised further suspicions. A breakthrough came when Hall confessed to her boyfriend about the murders. This led authorities to search Tunstall's apartment, where they discovered the bodies of the 3 children. The investigation revealed that Hall had planned the crime, purchasing items such as a sharp object, rubbing alcohol, and a nasal aspirator in preparation for the attack. On October 13, 2006, a grand jury indicted Tiffany Hall on charges of first-degree murder and intentional homicide of an unborn child.
She was also suspected of killing Tunstall's 3 children, ages 7, 2, and 1, and concealing their bodies in a washer and dryer. Hall was held on a $5 million bond. Prosecutors considered seeking the death penalty, but ultimately decided against it. On June 9, 2008, Tiffany Hall pleaded guilty to all 5 charges, 3 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of intentional homicide of an unborn child. In exchange for her guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Hall was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court acknowledged her mental health issues, including a history of psychiatric hospitalizations and an IQ in the mid-70s. Despite these factors, Hall's actions were deemed premeditated and heinous.
Case 4. Andrea Hicks Jackson. On May 16, 1983, Jacksonville police officer Gary Bevel responded to a routine call involving Andrea Hicks Jackson, who claimed her car had been vandalized. However, as Bevel investigated, Jackson's behavior became erratic, and what started as a false report quickly escalated into a deadly confrontation. During the arrest for filing a false report, Jackson attacked Bevel. As Bevel searched for keys Jackson claimed to have dropped, she pulled out a gun and shot him 6 times, fatally wounding him. The shooting sent shockwaves through Jacksonville, with Officer Bevel fighting for his life in the hospital. Jackson was arrested shortly after and charged with first-degree murder. The city, particularly the law enforcement community, was left reeling from the brutal crime. Jackson's actions sparked widespread outrage and ignited a legal battle that would last for over 2 decades. In 1984, Jackson stood trial for the murder. The prosecution argued that she had ambushed Bevel in cold blood, while the defense claimed she had been in a compromised mental state. The jury convicted Jackson of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to death. However, her case was far from over. Legal challenges and appeals began to delay her execution, leading to significant twists in the case. In 1986, the Florida Supreme Court overturned Jackson's death sentence, citing improper jury instructions during the sentencing phase. This ruling marked the beginning of a long series of legal battles. Each time Jackson's sentence was overturned, her supporters hoped for a more lenient outcome, while law enforcement and Bevel's family felt justice had not been served. In 1996, after several years of appeals, the Florida Supreme Court commuted Jackson's sentence from death to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. This decision was met with mixed reactions. Some believed she should be given a chance at rehabilitation, considering her troubled past and mental health issues, while others felt the sentence was too lenient for such a brutal crime. In 2007, Jackson's parole hearings began, and a release date was set for 2108, a century after her conviction. Jacksonville law enforcement officials, including Sheriff John Rutherford, strongly opposed her release, citing the nature of the crime. As years passed, Jackson's parole hearings continued, but her potential release remained a contentious issue, with many arguing she should remain incarcerated for the rest of her life. The case, which had already spanned decades, remained a source of legal and emotional turmoil for all involved. Case 5. Tanya Thomas. Tanya Thomas, a 33-year-old mother from Port St. John, Florida, lived with her 4 children: Joel, 12, Jaslyn, 13, Jax, 15, and Pebbles, 17. From the outside, their family seemed typical, but behind closed doors, it was far from normal. Tanya's relationship with her children's father, Joe Johnson, was fraught with emotional and physical abuse. Despite attempts by child welfare authorities to intervene, the children remained in the toxic environment. Little did anyone know that this volatile situation would escalate in May 2012, leading to a tragic day of violence. On May 15, 2012, Tanya shocked the quiet neighborhood by committing an unthinkable act. At noon, she shot her 4 children inside their home. The children, sensing the danger, fled to a neighbor's house, desperately seeking help. Tanya, however, coaxed them back, promising safety. Tragically, once they returned, Tanya shot them all, taking their lives in cold blood. The children had no way of knowing that their return would seal their fate. The horrors inside the house were discovered later that day. Tanya had murdered her children before turning the gun on herself. Police investigations uncovered the chilling truth. The children's cries for help were ignored when they were manipulated back into the house. The tragedy was not just the result of a mother's madness, but the culmination of years of unresolved trauma and abuse. The community was left reeling, asking how such a tragedy could occur. The roots of this tragedy lay in a history of domestic violence. In 2000, Tanya's partner, Joe Johnson, assaulted her in front of the children, triggering child welfare investigations. Yet despite warnings, the children were returned to the home after just a month. This marked the beginning of a pattern of violence, and no further intervention took place, leaving the children at the mercy of their dangerous environment. Leading up to the shooting, tensions in the household had risen. In March 2012, Tanya's son, Jax, became involved in a violent altercation. Police reports showed incidents of physical violence between Tanya and her children, but no immediate action was taken. Neighbors had witnessed signs of distress, but none intervened. Despite numerous signs of escalating violence, the system failed to protect these vulnerable children.
Case 6. Lisa Coleman. On the morning of August 22, 2004, emergency responders arrived at a home in Dallas, Texas, to find 9-year-old Devontae Williams lifeless and severely malnourished. Weighing only 42 pounds, less than half of his expected weight, his condition revealed the horrors of child abuse. What began as a routine call turned into the discovery of a dark and twisted reality, exposing the abuse inflicted on Devontae by his caregivers. Lisa Coleman, 27, and her boyfriend, Mark A. McKinney, Devontae's primary caregivers, had appeared to be an ordinary couple. However, their pasts were far from typical. Coleman, a mother herself, had a history of domestic abuse and child neglect, while McKinney was no stranger to the law. Their neglect and abusive behavior created the perfect storm for Devontae's suffering, which escalated in the months leading to his tragic death. Devontae had endured years of abuse. He was often confined to a bedroom, sometimes shackled to a wall. His isolation from the outside world, lack of food, medical care, and emotional support went unnoticed by family, friends, and neighbors. This long history of abuse was a pattern in the household, and it eventually led to a deadly outcome. Over several months, Devontae's physical condition deteriorated as he was starved and deprived of essential nutrition. His weight plummeted to a mere 42 pounds, a shocking fraction of what a healthy 9-year-old should weigh. His body, weakened by hunger, was further harmed by poor hygiene and the absence of medical care. Yet his cries for help went unanswered. In his final hours, Devontae succumbed to starvation and dehydration. Medical reports confirmed the signs of abuse, visible marks from shackles and severe neglect. His caregivers, aware of his deteriorating state, failed to seek medical attention, and when he finally died, it was the culmination of years of physical, emotional, and psychological torment. The investigation that followed uncovered the full extent of the abuse. Devontae had been isolated and tortured for months. Forensic experts confirmed starvation and dehydration as the primary causes of death. Witnesses recalled seeing his deteriorating condition, but none knew the extent of his suffering. All evidence pointed to Coleman and McKinney as the perpetrators. Both were arrested and charged with capital murder and child abuse. Coleman, the primary caregiver, was particularly held accountable.
During the trial, her cold demeanor and lack of remorse shocked the public. Though her defense argued mental health issues, the jury convicted her and she was sentenced to death in 2006. McKinney received a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Case 7.
Linda Ann Weston. Linda Ann Weston's criminal path began long before her infamous crimes. Born in 1959 in Philadelphia, her early years were marked by poverty and instability, factors that contributed to the manipulative and violent behavior she would later display. Her criminal history started with minor offenses, but escalated over time. Weston had spent time in prison for various crimes, but her true infamy came when she began exploiting vulnerable individuals for financial gain. Weston's victims were not random. They were carefully chosen. She preyed on those who were mentally or physically disabled, often luring them with promises of care or a better life. Weston presented herself as a savior, convincing her victims to trust her. However, once they were under her control, she trapped them in abusive, isolated situations. These victims endured severe physical and emotional abuse, suffering in silence, far from the outside world. The most horrific chapter of Weston's crimes occurred in a basement in a dilapidated Philadelphia house. Here, Weston and her accomplices held multiple victims captive, some for years. The basement was a filthy prison where victims were often chained or kept in cages, deprived of food, water, and medical care. They were subjected to unimaginable conditions, isolated and treated as subhuman. The turning point came in 2011 when one victim, severely malnourished and abused, managed to escape. This young woman found help and contacted authorities, exposing Weston's brutal operations. Law enforcement acted quickly, raiding the home and uncovering the full extent of Weston's crimes. Her involvement in a human trafficking and abuse ring was revealed, and an investigation was launched. Weston was arrested along with her accomplices and charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, and human trafficking. The investigation uncovered that Weston had been involved in similar crimes across various states, targeting those who could not defend themselves. Her manipulative and cold-hearted tactics made her a difficult target for law enforcement, but they were determined to bring her to justice. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Weston's motive was rooted in greed and control. She exploited her victims for financial gain, stealing their Social Security checks or forcing them to beg for money on the streets. Weston's lack of empathy and her ability to manipulate and exploit vulnerable individuals revealed a woman driven by a hunger for power and money.
In 2013, Weston's trial became a public spectacle, with many survivors of her abuse bravely speaking out. She was convicted of kidnapping, conspiracy, and human trafficking. Weston was sentenced to life in prison, where she remains to this day. Her case left a lasting impact on both the victims and the public, with many questioning how someone could commit such heinous acts without remorse.
Case 8.
Tiffany Moss. In 2003, Tiffany Moss married Keith Moss, becoming the stepmother to his 10-year-old daughter, Imani. On the surface, the family seemed typical, living in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Imani, a shy and reserved child, had already faced a difficult childhood, but no one suspected the horrors unfolding behind closed doors. Over time, the family's facade began to crack, revealing a tragic tale of abuse and neglect. Imani's physical condition soon became concerning. Teachers, neighbors, and family members noticed her growing thinner and more withdrawn. Her clothes hung loosely on her frail frame, and she appeared sickly. In the months leading to her death, Imani's absences from school became frequent, and her health continued to deteriorate. Despite these warning signs, no one could fully comprehend the abuse happening in the home. What began as emotional neglect soon escalated into something far more sinister. Tiffany and Keith were the only ones aware of the full extent of Imani's suffering. The abuse was calculated and cruel. Tiffany later admitted in court that she had been starving Imani for months, forcing the girl to watch the family eat while she was denied food. Imani was isolated, frequently punished for small infractions. Neighbors noticed she never played with other children or interacted socially. What seemed like a normal home was actually a house of horrors. As Imani's condition worsened, she was confined to a room, her body frail and covered in sores from malnutrition. Tiffany continued to withhold food and medical care, and when Imani died, Tiffany did not seek help. Instead, she locked Imani away and failed to intervene as the girl slowly died. On May 29, 2013, Tiffany called the police, claiming Imani had died of natural causes. When authorities arrived, they discovered Imani's body discarded in a garbage bag in a nearby dumpster. The condition of the body revealed that she had been neglected for an extended period. Medical examiners confirmed the cause of death was malnutrition, dehydration, and neglect. This discovery launched a criminal investigation into the tragic circumstances of Imani's life and death. The investigation revealed a pattern of abuse. Neighbors came forward, recalling how Imani often came to their doors begging for food. Tiffany had also lied about the time of Imani's death, hiding the body for several days before discarding it. Evidence pointed to the extent of her manipulation and cruelty. In 2018, Tiffany Moss was arrested and charged with malice murder, child cruelty, and related offenses. During her trial, Tiffany admitted to starving Imani, but claimed it was never her intention to kill the child. The prosecution presented compelling evidence of Tiffany's months of abuse. Despite her defense, the jury convicted her, and in the end, Tiffany was sentenced to death.
Case 9. Lamora Williams. In 2017, the city of Atlanta was shocked by a chilling crime when 24-year-old Lamora Williams was arrested for the gruesome murders of her two young children, a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. The case gained national attention due to the horrific details that emerged, raising questions about mental health, neglect, and the choices made by a mother who was supposed to protect her children. This is the tragic story of Lamora Williams and the deaths of her children. On October 13, 2017, authorities were called to Lamora Williams' Atlanta apartment after a concerned family member discovered the lifeless bodies of her children. The apartment showed signs of neglect, and it was clear that the children had been left alone for several days with no food or water. The tragic discovery left the community in shock, with questions arising about what had transpired during the days the children were left unattended. Lamora Williams, a young mother, had struggled with various personal issues, including a difficult upbringing and erratic behavior. Friends and family reported that she seemed overwhelmed by motherhood, and her personal life was marked by instability. Prior to the deaths, Williams had exhibited poor decision-making, and mental health issues were believed to play a role in her behavior. Her background is crucial to understanding the tragic events that unfolded. Following the discovery of the children's bodies, the investigation quickly focused on Lamora Williams. Williams was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that her mental health struggles, including possible bipolar disorder, were a significant factor in her actions. However, whether her mental state contributed to the murders or not remained uncertain during the trial.
Mental health often complicates criminal cases, raising difficult questions about accountability. In 2019, Williams's trial began. She pleaded not guilty, but the prosecution argued that the deaths resulted from her deliberate neglect. The defense focused on her mental health struggles, contending that she wasn't fully responsible for her actions. The case drew widespread attention as it raised challenging questions about mental illness and maternal responsibility. In February 2020, after deliberation, the jury found Lamora Williams guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree cruelty to children. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the trial brought justice for the children, it sparked debates about the intersection of mental health and criminal law, leaving the community grieving the loss of 2 innocent lives and grappling with difficult questions about accountability.
Case number 10. Kimberly McCarthy. In 1987, Kimberly McCarthy, a 36-year-old woman from Lancaster, Texas, committed a crime that would define the rest of her life. Struggling with drug addiction and a troubled past, McCarthy targeted her elderly neighbor, Dorothy Booth, a 71-year-old known for her kindness and generosity. One evening, under the guise of friendship, McCarthy entered Booth's home. What followed was horrifying. McCarthy stabbed Booth multiple times with a kitchen knife, leaving her to die in her own house. Afterward, she stole Booth's car and personal belongings, leaving behind a gruesome crime scene that shocked the community. Detectives quickly zeroed in on McCarthy after neighbors reported seeing her near Booth's home before the murder. Evidence mounted rapidly. Stolen property linked directly to McCarthy, and her criminal history involving theft and drugs painted her as the prime suspect. Within days, she was arrested. Initially, McCarthy denied any involvement, but under intense questioning, she confessed, claiming the killing happened in a fit of rage. However, doubts soon surfaced about whether she fully understood the consequences of her confession. McCarthy's trial began in 1988, drawing significant public attention. The prosecution depicted her as a cold-blooded killer who murdered Booth for financial gain. The defense countered with a narrative of a woman shaped by addiction, mental health struggles, and a difficult upbringing. However, McCarthy's lawyer was widely criticized for providing an ineffective defense, failing to present key mitigating evidence. Despite these arguments, the jury convicted McCarthy of capital murder, and she was sentenced to death. The verdict sparked debates over whether justice had truly been served. McCarthy's death sentence made her one of the few women on Texas's death row, placing her case under heightened scrutiny. Texas was already known for its high execution rate, but McCarthy's gender and circumstances drew national attention. Advocates questioned whether the death penalty was appropriate, highlighting her addiction, mental health issues, and troubled childhood. Her defense team launched multiple appeals, citing inadequate legal representation and racial bias. Yet, despite these challenges, the courts consistently upheld her sentence. For more than 2 decades, McCarthy's legal team fought to overturn her conviction. They argued that her trial had been deeply flawed, particularly due to her lawyer's failure to present vital mitigating evidence. In 2008, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals acknowledged that McCarthy's counsel had been ineffective, but this ruling did not lead to a new trial. Eventually, her execution date was set for 2013. With time running out, her lawyers continued to challenge the sentence, but their efforts were unsuccessful. On June 26,
2013, after spending 20 years on death row, Kimberly McCarthy was executed by lethal injection in Texas. She became one of the few women executed in the United States in recent history. In her final moments, McCarthy expressed remorse, but also claimed she was a victim of a broken justice system. Her execution sparked protests and renewed debates over racial bias, gender dynamics, and the fairness of the death penalty.
Case 11. Crystal Gail Mangum. In March 2006, Crystal Gail Mangum, a 27-year-old African-American woman, claimed she was sexually assaulted by 3 members of the Duke University lacrosse team, David Evans, Colin Finnerty, and Reed Seligman, during a party in Durham, North Carolina. Her allegations quickly sparked national media attention and polarized public opinion. While some rallied behind her, others doubted her claims, fueling a racially charged debate. The Durham police launched an investigation, but key physical evidence, such as DNA, failed to link the players to the crime. Mangum's supporters maintained her innocence, but her story was inconsistent, initially identifying a different player before naming the 3 accused. Surveillance footage and alibis raised further doubts, leading to growing skepticism about her version of events. Despite the lack of solid evidence, Durham District Attorney Mike Nifong aggressively pursued the case, drawing even more media scrutiny. The case evolved into a media frenzy, heavily influenced by racial dynamics. The lacrosse team, predominantly white, was depicted as symbols of privilege, while Mangum, a black woman, became a victim of racial violence. The narrative sparked intense debates over race, class, and justice. Public opinion split, with some supporting Mangum's demand for justice, while others believed the lacrosse players were victims of a false accusation. In 2007, ethical concerns about Mike Nifong's conduct surfaced. He was accused of withholding exculpatory DNA evidence and making misleading statements. These actions led to his disbarment, undermining the prosecution's case and casting doubt on the investigation's integrity. Later that year, the charges against the 3 lacrosse players were dropped. The North Carolina Attorney General's office reviewed the case, concluding there was no evidence to support Mangum's allegations and declaring the players innocent. The exoneration of the players shocked the public and shattered Mangum's credibility. The aftermath was far-reaching. While the players were cleared, their reputations were forever damaged. Mangum's life took a downward spiral, culminating in her 2011 arrest for the murder of her boyfriend, Reginald Day, after a domestic dispute turned violent. The tragic outcome raised difficult questions about the justice system and the dangers of rushing to judgment based on unverified accusations. In 2013, Mangum was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Her conviction marked the sad end of a tumultuous chapter in her life, leaving many to question her credibility and the lasting impact of the Duke lacrosse case on her future. Case 12. In 1999, Malika Griffin's violent crime and subsequent fugitive status shocked the nation. Griffin shot and killed her neighbor, Jason Patrick Horsley, in a brutal act of violence over a small disagreement. What began as a dispute over tools left on the sidewalk escalated when Griffin, enraged, retrieved a 9mm handgun and shot Horsley in the back, killing him instantly. She fled the scene, carjacking a vehicle at gunpoint, and a nationwide manhunt ensued. The investigation into Horsley's death quickly revealed unsettling details.
Authorities found Griffin's apartment, uncovering a disturbing arsenal of weapons, including a carbine, hand grenades, and bomb-making books. More chilling were the violent and racist rants in Griffin's diary, revealing her extremist beliefs and hatred for white people. These discoveries painted Griffin as not just a murderer, but a woman driven by dangerous ideologies. Police also found that she had stolen a car during her escape, marking the beginning of a prolonged search for the fugitive. Griffin went into hiding after the murder, using false identities to evade capture. For 6 years, she remained elusive, staying under the radar and moving across the country. She lived under the alias Leak Griffin, while the FBI continued their pursuit. Griffin's case was featured on America's Most Wanted, which led to tips from the public. However, it wasn't until 2005 that a breakthrough occurred. A former co-worker who recognized Griffin from a segment on the show contacted authorities. This tip led to Griffin's location in El Cajon, California. On June 25, 2005, after 6 years on the run, Griffin was arrested. Her capture was the result of persistent investigative work and public assistance, marking the end of one of the FBI's longest manhunts. Griffin was extradited back to Colorado, where she faced charges of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and motor vehicle theft. In 2006, Griffin's trial began, and prosecutors presented strong evidence: the murder weapon, the disturbing diary, and the arsenal of weapons. Griffin claimed she acted in self-defense, but the jury saw it differently. The premeditated nature of her actions, including the escape and her diary, convinced the jury of her guilt. Griffin was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The case closed, but the legacy of her violence and the years-long pursuit lingered.
I believe justice was served in each case, though the complexities of mental health, bias, and systemic failures often complicate the outcomes, highlighting both the necessity of holding individuals accountable and the ongoing debate about whether the system is truly fair in every instance. What is your opinion on whether the justice system adequately served justice or failed in certain aspects? Share your thoughts and let's discuss how we can ensure a more just and equitable system for everyone.